she's completed. Ain't she a thing of beauty? Never seen something so pretty. Size of my woman. So what I typically like to do is to put the sync cables around these control arms. You know, just because I don't want them to get in the way, you know, especially if they're dangling out here in front, then what can happen is you can get, I mean, right now it's in the shot, especially if you're in a really wide zoom. So if you're, you know, 10, 12 millimeters, you know, even anything in this is going to be in the shot. So you want to be careful where your optical sync cables are, and because they're sort of free moving on here, which is really nice. You know, they move really freely on here, so it can get in your shot. So it's good to sort of have control. So I like to put them around, and they're nice and sort of springy, so they can do that. I also like to put it on the other side of this focus light right here, so I have them sort of behind it. And now, you know, it's really nice that you can move it around without having to fiddle with these optical sync cables. Another thing that I like to do is when you're setting it up, it's good to have the control arm clamp facing towards you. That way you can change it. You know, if this side is on this side, then it's hard to reach around and change it. So it's really important to remember to install all of these with the handles facing you. And obviously you want to keep them tight. That wouldn't happen underwater, only because the weight is reduced. You know, above water it's very high, so they'll fall around. But you got to keep them nice and tight. And also remember to tighten these bulkheads really tight, otherwise they'll come loose, and that can be really annoying. I mean, I've never had them come off underwater, but I mean, if the bulkhead comes off, that's really annoying, and reinstalling would be also really annoying. So you don't want to have to deal with that. What else? So in terms of strobe position, right now we're at a wide angle setup, and the strobe position is usually something like this, where it's further out. And in fact, now it's going to fall down because it's not tight enough. When I first started shooting, it's just going to start drooping down because it's so heavy. But it won't do this underwater. So here I have the camera in a wide angle setup. Strobe position is really important. I cannot even stress that enough. The problem with taking photographs underwater is that there's a lot of sediment and crap in the water, and you're really going to try and minimize the amount of crap that you get in your photo. So the way to do that is to set up your strobes in a certain way that when they fire, the light does not reflect off of all the floating crap and shoot and reflect back into your sensor and then end up in your photo. So they call that backscatter, is when there's all this stuff floating in the water, and you can see it in the photos. So there's some techniques to get rid of the backscatter, and one of the techniques is to feather your strobes out. So what you do is you move your strobes so that they face outward. This would seem kind of strange because that's really counterintuitive to the type of photography you do in a studio or in any other situation, because most of the time you want to shoot your strobes at the subject. But in this case, what happens is this particular strobe has about 100 degree wide beam, so it's going to shoot essentially like that, and you're going to want to have the edges of that beam catch your subject, and you're going to want to do the exact same thing over here. So what you're doing is you're having both beams meet at the subject, and then have the light hit your subject and bounce back. Now this is in order to minimize the amount of light that's hitting all of the backscatter that would be in front of your subject or around your subject, and it would reduce it. And this is the technique that everybody uses. It's feathering out the strobes. And again, it does seem a little counterintuitive, but it works. And it's something that you should try and use. Now, if I were shooting macro, I'd be using a very different setup. And also, well, I suppose that there's one more wide angle strobe position we can talk about, and that would be to change your strobe position and bring them in a little bit. I'm probably gonna get criticized for something, I'm sure, on this video, only because underwater photographers are fanatics about everything. So it's a little off balance, and again, underwater it's a little bit easier to manipulate these things. But when you're a little bit closer to your subject, you can bring in the strobes a little bit closer and just shoot them straight. This is again, this is if you're pretty close to your subject and you're using wide angle. It's another technique that I was taught when I was shooting in Palau, and it's effective because feathering can be a little bit difficult to make sure that you're catching your subject in the light. So this is another way to get your subject lit up, but there is more of a danger of getting backscatter. And also this is a little bit closer to a macro setup, although I wouldn't use this exactly for a macro setup. Macro photography underwater is the exact opposite of wide angle, and you can really only do two types of photography. You can only either do macro or you can do wide angle. There's one of the most popular lenses to shoot photography with Canon and with their DSLRs is the 24-70 L lens, and it's a fantastic lens, but it's essentially useless underwater. It's not wide enough for wide angle, and it's not long enough for macro, at least for me. I don't think anybody shoots with it underwater, at least nobody that I've ever met or read about. You either shoot with a 60mm or 100mm macro, or longer, or you stick with something very, very wide. And this is because you're trying to reduce the amount of space between your camera and your subject. You want to reduce the amount of water that's between you and the subject, because there's a lot of information that's lost. If your subject is 15 feet away, it's not going to look that good, and these strobes will not light up something that's 15 feet away. You want the subject to be 3 feet away, ideally, or even closer. 5 feet, that's okay. It's a little far. Getting further out of 5 feet, the subject's just not going to look as good. So you want to get your subjects in really close. Now, when it comes to macro photography, and again, this is a wide angle port. With macro, you typically are going to stick with a strobe position in something like this. This will provide you even light. This won't provide you directional light. Sometimes you want directional light, so you can even turn one strobe off if you want directional light and have shadows. And you can play around with different positions. This is a kind of a standard position. If you're closer to your subject, then you can move the strobes back. If you're further away from your subject, you can move your strobes closer. These control arms are just like they're called. They're control arms. I mean, they make it very easy and convenient to control the position of your strobes. And what you have to do, because they are cumbersome, they're not easy to change very fast. You have to, keep them at such a tension. You have to keep the clamps at such a tension to where you can move these arms where it's still going to stick. If they get too loose, it'll just start to dangle. You don't want to have that either. So it's getting the right strobe position is imperative to getting a good photo, and it's tough to change your strobes really fast. So what you have to do is you have to pre-visualize everything, and this is sort of photography philosophy 101. But pre-visualizing the shot's really important, and when you come across an opportunity to take a photograph and you're swimming by a situation or a type of fish that's caught your eye, it's always good to have your strobes already set up in that position. And if they're not set up in a position that you think is going to get a good photograph, then before you start to pursue the subject, you change your strobe settings and change your strobe positions. And then once you get your strobes in the right position, then you can go down on the reef and you can attack your subject in the nicest way possible, of course. And that's typically a really good way to do it. You want to have things already set up, and it's just like any endeavor. You want to have the equipment disappear, and you just want to be paying a lot of attention to the subject, and that's how you're going to get good photos. Otherwise, your photos are not going to be that good. So other odds and ends. The interesting thing about these focus lights, these are great focus lights. These Solas. Now they have these lights that have red settings. So this has 3 settings, and then it has a red setting. Turn that off. So it's kind of strange that it has a red setting, but the red setting is really pretty cool because crustaceans and cephalopods cannot see the color red. I think that they get a sense that there's another color out there that they're currently being looked at. I mean, if you have the red light on at night and you've come across an octopus, he can't see you, and it's kind of mean almost. You feel like you're cheating a little bit. But it's a lot of fun to sneak up on animals and critters, and shrimp. I like shrimp a lot. I really like colorful shrimp, and having the red light is really, really nice to have at night. Also, just having a focus light in general, this is, as you can see, this is a very wide beam. I don't know how wide exactly, but it's like a floodlight, and you need to have that so you can focus on your subjects. It's really more for macro photography than it would be for wide angle. I don't shoot wide. I don't know anybody really that shoots that much wide angle at night. And these focus lights, while they're useful during the day, they're much more useful at night. So they are imperative for macro photography, especially at night. And at night is when all the cool stuff happens. So get yourself a good focus light. And it's funny because everybody raved about this light when it first came out, and the red on it is a really cool function, but the red is not as powerful as the white light, and it's kind of goofy because there's a lot of lights out there now, focus lights, that just you can put a red cap over the light and it changes the light's wavelength to red. So why not just do that instead of having a more expensive light that has red LEDs in it? I mean, it's kind of silly.